Okay, welcome back, everyone. Now for our next panel. It's 12 years since the G20 Pittsburgh commitments unleashed a wave of reforms in the derivatives markets. Overall, these reforms had led to transformational change that has reduced risk and made markets more resilient. One area that has been challenging has been trade reporting, and many jurisdictions are reviewing the reporting rules with the aim of improving consistency and accuracy. ISDA has a technology-first solution, which should be no surprise to anybody here, to this problem that uses the common domain model to implement digital regular reporting. And we've already seen great results in some of the proof of concept work that we've already done. I'm looking forward to hearing more from our panelists, a packed panel of people led by Tara Kruse, the Global Head of Infrastructure, Data, and Non-Cleared Margin. Tara?
Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon. Yeah, I'm pleased to have the chance to moderate this panel on improving regulatory reporting. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. I was in the thick of industry implementation back in 2012 when the CFTC did this the first time around. So there's a bit of deja vu here. But overall, I think the industry and is supportive of the efforts that are being made by the CFTC and global regulators to find ways to improve the quality and accuracy of the data that's reported and improve the ways that they can use that data to understand what's happening in the industry. Since the G20 summit that Scott mentioned, you've had CPMI and IOSCO and FSB as regulatory bodies that have worked together with the regulators to come up with harmonized reportable data elements, the critical data elements, or CDE, plus identifiers like the unique product identifier, the unique transaction identifier, and of course the LEI. Come May 25th next year, the CFTC will be the first jurisdiction to go live with those new harmonized critical data elements. To discuss both the challenges and opportunities created by this, I'm joined by a very experienced panel who has a variety of different perspectives. So let me introduce them. I've got Sunil Challa, Director of Business Architecture at Barclays, Kate Delp, who's the General Manager at the DTCC Trade Repository, my colleague Eleanor, who's the Director of Data Reporting here at ISDA, Igor Kaplun, Executive Director and Head of Regulatory Reporting Business Development for North America at IHS Markit, and Wypior, who's back with us today, Executive Director and Assistant General Counsel at JPMorgan. They've all been around the trade reporting space for a long time and have a lot of knowledge to share with us. I'm going to start with Eleanor today. Can you baseline our discussion with some details on the CFTC's amended swap data reporting requirements?
I will talk about the documents related to the swap data reporting amendments, and I'll leave the specific challenges to the panelists to cover later. So parts 43, 45, and 49, the Federal Register was published in November of 2020. And some of the crucial documents for compliance that are related to that include the CFTC technical specifications, which basically outline the allowable values, the format, and the definitions for the 128 data elements, which are required under the CFTC new rules, what we call the rewrite. In addition, there are the Sdr message specifications, which are based off the CFTC technical specifications and unique to each Sdr. Another crucial document is the Sdr document, the guidebook, which is provided by the CFTC to the Sdr or the multiple Sdrs with instructions specific to the Sdrs. I think in terms of the changes in the events to these particular documents, what recently has occurred is that CFTC has revised their final technical specifications and published them just a mere 27 days ago. And what that causes is kind of a domino effect where the SDRs now must update their message specifications to accommodate the changes in the validations or format allowable values for the technical specifications. And then the industry must build to that. So in fact, the 18 months provided in the Federal Register for implementation is now a very compressed timeline of about 6 months until May, if you include the code freezes that commonly occur at the end of the year.
Thanks, Eleanor. Kate, can you give us a little more perspective on how DTCC as an SDR is looking to address the various challenges, some of which Eleanor has touched on?
Sure. Thank you, Tara. First, before I start that, I just want to give everyone a little bit of context here. The CFTC has been working with the SDRs and with the industry since, but mostly with the SDRs, since late last year, in December of last year. I went back through all of my notes. I somehow became ringleader, coordinating on the 3 SDR side. We had over 75 meetings with the CFTC, each lasting over 2 hours. So you think about all the prep work, all of the meeting time itself, and then after the meetings, all around the technical specifications. So it is a massive effort. And I think everyone underestimated how big of an effort it would be, because clearly we just received those final technical specifications, as Eleanor said, only 27 days ago. And there are still some outstanding questions that both the SDRs and the industry has around those technical specifications, but we are taking this version as being the final. As Eleanor also alluded to, there is a guidebook, an Sdr Guidebook. The SDRs have been working with the CFTC on that as well. And we just received a revised version of that 2 nights ago. So we're still in our review process of that. So when you take both of these documents, you have to look at them. And it's not just the SDRs, but the entire industry has to look at both of these documents in tandem in order to be ready for a go live. The technical specifications gives you those, what's the final tally now? 138, 128, plus then leg level fields, 128 fields in the technical specification. The guidebook includes the SDR's product related fields that are different, SDR to SDR. Our own SDR required fields like DTCC or DDR has something called message type that indicates to us whether it's a Part 43 message or a trade state message or evaluation message. That is not common across the SDRs. So it has all of those fields in it. And then it has additional fields that the CFTC did not include in the technical specifications that that each SDR needs in order for us to be compliant with our regulations. So put those all together and you come up with one full set of fields that need to be reported. The industry needs this because that drives our report layouts. The industry then needs to take that and work that into your data reconciliation processes that we know are now going to be even more scrutinized with the new Part 49 requirements, those requirements. So you take all that all together, and as Eleanor said, we're in a very compressed time frame now. We all know we need a certain amount of time to work together and then on our own to design, build, and thoroughly test all aspects of these wholesale changes that is happening with the CFTC's reporting regime. So we have talked to the CFTC saying that it's May 25th, 2022 is absolutely, and I do not use this word lightly, unachievable. If they were to stick with that date, they would not get what they were looking for, which is better data quality, more standardized data across the 3 SDRs. Today, we all send them different types of data and they try to put that together somehow on their side. But I do hope that they have all listened to us and that we will see some sort of delay. But those are really the biggest challenges. It's just, we ran out of time to make these types of massive and important changes. Don't get me wrong. I think this is really great. And I think the CFTC should be commended for working this closely with the industry and the SDRs. They didn't just throw us a technical specification in November of 2020 and say, go off, build, have fun. It's just a shame that we ran out of time. I don't know if there was anything more or if that covered it. Sorry,
I think we get it. Thank you. Oda, a lot of moving parts here, right? From your perspective as a reporting counterparty subject to these new regs, which pieces of it, keep you up at night?
Correct. So thank you. I feel we are going absolutely in the right direction. As an industry, we have said we want global data standardization and harmonization so we can report globally to all regulators the same data. And CPM Moscow came up with this data, right? So I think this is correctly what we want. But I also do remember when you led like the data working group, we had so many questions on the global level of like, wait a second, you are coming up with these standardized data fields. They don't really make sense to us. And we sending comments and they were disregarded, right? Now the CFTC is implementing these rules and we have the same questions. We are like, wait a second, what does this mean, right? So we as a reporting party, we are just looking at the technical specification and I carry them with me every day. It's 128 and data validation, what have you. And they're just some fields we are like, what are we supposed to do? And I want to give you like an example. The Part 45 rule says we are supposed to report valuation data, valuation amount, in Part 45. And then it says, okay, the valuation amount is the daily mark that you provide to the counterparty under the external business conduct rule. And then you look up in the external business conduct rule, it says, yeah, just send them a daily mark. And it should not necessarily be the price at which you would kind of terminate the trade and make like payments for to the other counterparty. Okay, this is what we have done for years now. And we do report the daily mark that we give the counterparty also to the SDR under Part 45. But then they say in the definition as specified in our appendix. So then you look in the appendix and the field that is valuation data, field 110 basically says you should report as a valuation data the exit price. What would a counterparty pay in a regular market to exit this trade? So they actually do want the price. So there is this total discrepancy between what's in the rule and what is in the CDE fields, where we are caught in the middle. What are we supposed to do? Or another example is all these collateral fields, is quite a few of them. They talk about IM and VM. And everybody knows in the room probably we have regulated initial margin and we have regulated variation margin. But if a counterparty is not subject to these rules, you just have collateral and an independent amount, right? We also have to report for these trades. So how do we deal with an independent amount that is not regulated as IM or VM under the margin rules? Do I treat it like IM or VM or treat it as something else as regular collateral? So it's absolutely unclear. No, that was a question we had raised from the very beginning. How should we treat this? Is it now collateralized, uncollateralized, no collateral at all because it's not regulated? It's a big question and affects quite a few of those fields. Another question is like field 117. There is like an indicator that we have to give to the regulator when we report collateral data on a portfolio level. On a portfolio is usually like one CSA. And they say yes or no, true or false, whether that particular portfolio also includes trades exempt from swap reporting. And we're like, there is no exemption from swap reporting. We report all swaps. There's cross-border guidance pursuant to which a trade is not subject to reporting, but there's no really exemption from swap reporting. So then we said maybe they wanted to say not reported as swaps. And if we take that view, that means, well, security-based swaps, of course, are not reported to the CFTC. And if they want us to report, kind of check the box, yes, no, whether a portfolio of collateral also is given for security-based swaps, we basically always have to tag that as true because, as you know, under the prudential regulator margin rules, portfolio of swaps are always on swaps and security-based swaps level. But then comes the next question. If we take that view, do they want to know whether security-based swaps are actually in the portfolio or whether they could be in the portfolio? Because you have days maybe where you only have swaps in the portfolio, next day you only have security-based swaps. So everything is unclear. And actually we have raised that question as well. And the funny thing is we're sending in these questions and we get an answer to certain questions, but to other questions, it's just like, no answers. So
you're right. Some of these questions have been out there for a long time. Yeah. And now when you actually go to implement it, then you really, you won't get the quality and consistency, or you won't, I guess, give them the data that they seem to be looking for. Correct. Right? Because we don't really fully understand what they're trying to get because it's not fully sensible to us. Yeah.
I could go on, but you can take over.
Igor, from your perspective, what challenges are your clients most concerned about for the May 25th compliance date?
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. So, similar concerns that I think were raised previously. Obviously, we're looking at a 6-month really implementation timeline when you start thinking about sort of code freezes at the end of the year. So, just the compressed timeline is probably the biggest issue at the end of the day. Obviously, there's still some open questions with the regulators as to what needs to be reported, how it needs to be reported. There's an open question about whether that May timeline is actually going to stick. And right, in most cases, you can make the argument that any sort of delay to an implementation timeline is seen as a positive sign. It gives the industry more time to prepare. I think the challenge in this circumstance is that until that delay gets announced, all of us here have to work towards that May date, right? And it can get announced tomorrow. It can get announced in a month or 2 months or 3 months, right? So I think that's the challenge for the industry, is sort of thinking about what could happen versus kind of the reality on the ground of something we have to continue to do. So that's a challenge for the clients that we serve. And I think the other part around the possible delay, again, it could be a good thing. Where it presents a problem for firms that have obligations in multiple jurisdictions is you start looking at kind of the global roadmap of reporting obligations, but also possible changes, right? So if you look at, we have EMIR refit that's happening next year. We have potential rewrites that are going to occur in Singapore and Australia and other jurisdictions. And when you stack that up and you look at, okay, for the next 2 to 3 years, the roadmap of regulatory change is pretty significant. So then, is a delay to the CFTC rewrite a good thing when it could potentially coincide with a go live of another regulatory change in another region? So those are all some of the things that I think our clients and certainly the industry are really grappling with, is to try to make sense and plan for it. How do you plan? How do you resource? How do you put project teams on these unknown things that could happen or couldn't happen? And I think that's the difficult part of this equation. Certainly, there's some more practical and specific issues, as Oda and others mentioned, around collateral reporting. That's always been, I think, a gray area is probably the best way to say it. I think, you have collateral reporting that's required in Europe and other jurisdictions, and there's always this view of, well, collateral's at a portfolio level, but we're reporting trades. How do you actually net that down into a position and report a collateral amount against that position for it all to kind of sync up? That's certainly a very practical example of how firms struggle with some of these obligations. I think it was alluded to earlier, some of the verification requirements are also pretty stringent and onerous for swap dealers specifically, where swap dealers have to verify the data that's in the SDRs, and they have to actually correct any errors within 7 days. That is very problematic for a lot of firms. I mean, if you think about in your own experiences of dealing with any sort of errors in reporting, identifying the issue, getting to the root cause, and then working on a fix, and then getting all that done in 7 days. And if you can't get that done in 7 days, you then have to notify the regulator. It creates a pretty challenging operational burden for the industry to be able to stay compliant with that requirement. So there's sort of the macro side of what's happening globally, and kind of factor that into just your own resources, your own projects. And there's very specific CFTC rewrite challenges that I think the industry really struggles with.
Thank you, Igor. So even if the May 25th date holds and we get there, and even if the industry figures out how to comply, we're not done, right, with the work ready to comply with the CFTC requirements. Eleanor, why not?
There's effectively 2 additional implementation dates because under the rewrite, the CFTC will require the unique product identifier, the UPI, and the ISO 2022 standard. The UPI is not quite ready. The ISO 4914 is not yet published, although we're expecting it in November this year. And the UPI system is still being stood up. The DSB, who's going to be the sole UPI service provider, will begin issuing codes, according to their statements, in July of 2022. But this doesn't include the implementation that the industry has to undergo to build in the global UPI. The ISO 2022 does not yet include the CFTC specific data element schema. Once CFTC submits their proposals for their jurisdiction specific schema to the registration authority, it then has to go through the ISO process before it gets formally adopted into the ISO standard, and that normally takes 6 months.
But if from a reporting party perspective, what's involved in kind of revisiting your product identification to implement a UPI?
That's a lot. I mean, if you think about it, currently we have all our systems tagged like to apply the ISDA taxonomy, right? Because that's how the SDR wants us to report it. Now you basically have to redo the whole thing. So we have to have, I think we have to, when we go live with this, we have to have a library of existing UPIs to tag all our trades to these new UPIs, right? That's a lot of work. But also, I mean, one thing to keep in mind, the CFTC still has not, I don't think, approved the UPI, right? So they have officially to approve it. We don't know whether they're going to approve it with conditions that they say, well, UPI is good enough, but you still have to report a certain fields. Then we have both counterparties have to keep the UPI in their records, meaning you now have to build probably something that you put it in the confirmation so that the non-reporting party has it, or you put it into Markit with electronic matching, whatever, so that there is a UPI record. And then also as part of portfolio reconciliation. So basically, I think as an industry, we have to come together and build up some kind of a library of UPIs we can go live with, and how we exchange these UPIs or all use them at the same time, and then put that all into our system. That is a lot of work. And I can also assume we have, like, you know, these custom bar equities always comes with these strategies, what they have, and then they have no UPI, then they have to apply for it, and they need to have it before they trade. It's a lot of work. I don't know how quickly they actually can generate a UPI if you want to trade. So these are all things we have to go through as an industry.
Yeah. Thank you. Kate, I'm guessing it's even more complicated when you get to the SDR level in terms of trying to shift from the flexibility you have now in terms of product identification to the UPI.
Yes. And one of the problems is we still don't understand, not just what the CFTC or the Canadian regulators or SEC, North America, but globally, we have no idea what the regulators want to see. What that means is, as Oda was saying, you know, if you look at the tech spec today, there's one field for product identifier.
Yeah.
But there are a number of fields that are product related. Mm-hmm. And then you have in the guidebook all of the SDR fields that are product related. So what happens with all of those? We still don't know. We've been kind of told unofficially by the CFTC that they expect the product fields in there to remain. So once UPI is implemented, those product-related fields are also going to remain. So what does that mean for an SDR? Are the regulators going to turn around or even trade repositories globally? Are the regulators going to turn around and say, hey, trade repository, we expect that you're going to have that full library at all times of the UPI and all of the associated data elements that go along with it? So if ODA sends in UPI ABC and then the other product related fields, it has a bunch of values there. Are we going to be expected to compare the values inside the UPI that we've taken out, compare value number 5 with product field number 5. And if they contradict one another, are we going to have to reject that? Or are they going to be different? It says that UPI, the one value in the UPI is whatever it is. And then over here, it says something different. So the regulators really have to start getting a feeling for what they want out of this, and to let us know so that we can then, it's that domino effect always. It's so that we can then let everyone else know how this is going to impact their reporting into the trade repositories. And for ISO, it's the same thing. ISO 20022, we're still not really sure what that's going to look like. And we're just at the ready. We keep telling the regulators, not just in North America, but globally, that we're more than happy to work with them to work through these implementation issues. And we just hope that they pick this up sooner rather than later, because we've already seen what happens if you don't do something in time. You're going to get more condensed timeframes, but that's what we're thinking about right now.
Thanks, Kate. Igor, anything to add from your perspective on UPI or ISO 20022 impact?
Sure. So yeah, just a couple of points. I definitely want to echo what others said about UPI. I think it's one of these things that's being vastly underestimated in terms of the amount of work that's required to implement a UPI system globally for all market participants, for all reporting counterparties. It starts with, in some cases, at the front office, the trading systems, risk management systems, trade capture. There's a lot of other things that go sort of, behind the scenes within a firm's own reporting structure to get the data out of their system to actually report. So to possibly have to remap your entire infrastructure to now factor in a new UPI system is no small feat, and it's going to take time. I think the other point around UPI is, we're talking about certainly CFTC requirements, and the CFTC is mandating the UPI be present if it's ready. Again, sort of looking at this globally, right? So what happens if UPI is ready to go and is available in the US, but you as a reporting party have to report in multiple jurisdictions? Well, do you use UPI only for your CFTC reporting, but you're still using it as a taxonomy or some other taxonomy for reporting under EMIR or MOS or ASIC? How does that work? Do you make the decision then to sort of jump the gun and say, I'm going to use UPI globally, even though it's not mandated by other regulators? Or do you wait until that mandate actually kicks in around the world? So those are some of the things that I think are going to be really challenging for the industry to implement, even if a UPI system is available today. It's not a plug and play solution, right? Whenever UPI is available, that's the start date. That's day one. So it's not going to be done overnight. And similarly on the ISO piece, ISO does have a lot of benefits, and it's clear that that's where the industry is going from a global perspective, is to implement a common format for reporting. The reality is going to be that the schema for ISO for CFTC reporting is going to look different to the schema for EMIR reporting. And sorry to sort of harp on the sort of global aspect of it, but I think it's important for some of the larger firms that have multiple obligations in multiple regions is, there's a lot of discussion around harmonization, and I think everyone here is supportive of it. I think the reality is, there needs to be synchronization as much as there is harmonization. You've got to line up these things so they're timed the right way. Because if you go live again with UPI in the US, but you don't go live with UPI in Europe, what does that mean? Your data quality is going to suffer. So I think those are some of the challenges and some of the things that we all need to consider as we look at ISO and UPI. And as was raised earlier, I think the practical side again is going to be that whether CFTC goes live in May of next year or if it does get pushed out, there is a likelihood that there will be a rewrite 2.0 that will actually bring in the UPI and the ISO thereafter, unless the delay is long enough to sort of give time for the UPI system and for ISO to be developed. But it does make it challenging. Absolutely.
Yeah, it sounds like you end up with a lot of duplicative and throwaway work by having different
Absolutely.
compliance dates for each, because there's a knock-on impact as you go along. So, Eleanor, what's the answer?
So I think having an 18-month extension to the current compliance date of May 2022 would have the effect of having a single implementation date for the reporting rules, the UPI, and the ISO to do and resolve many of the issues that the panelists have stated today.
Okay, it's out there.
Yeah.
Okay, but now we want to look at another opportunity, and Sunil has been sitting here very patiently, but we want to make sure we leverage his expertise in this panel too. So, on the face of it, the idea of having consistent data standards like the CDE seems very appealing, right? And then you have, say, technical specifications from the CFTC, adding on these layers gives you more specificity, although we've heard that there are still challenges to work through on how all the pieces fit together to understand, what it is that you're supposed to report and try to have firms come to the same understanding, right? The challenge with getting consistent, good quality reporting has always been, what I refer to as interpretation risk, right? Here's the rule, it's on a piece of paper. Here's the tech spec, it's on a piece of paper, right? Every firm takes that and individually goes off and figures out how to turn that into executable code to be able to meet the reporting requirement. And you have to figure out how those 128 data fields translate for each different asset class, each different product, each product variable, and the answers may be different. And each firm may come up with different answers. Sometimes best practices are developed through the industry to help get some consensus about how to do it. But nonetheless, it's difficult when everyone's doing a separate implementation and individually assessing what is required to get to a really, truly consistent approach to it, to get the regulators the consistency and quality of the data they want. So, in walks the Digital Regulatory Reporting Initiative, or DRR, from ISDA that is meant to try to help address this. And I'm going to turn it over to Sunil now to
Sure.
talk about what we mean by this.
Okay, thanks, Tara. And I have to say that it's fantastic to be back in a room with all of you on a panel. So thanks to ISDA for that. So we heard like a couple of times it being mentioned that we started CFTC reporting probably 10 years back. So it's been a decade plus, where we have been on panels like this, where we have discussed all the issues. All of you were there. And over the last 10 years, it's interesting that we didn't touch on this aspect, but if you look at collectively what the industry has spent on just pure reg reporting solutions across all of the industry participants, depending on which market survey you look at, it would be roughly anywhere between 6 to 8 billion, maybe slightly more than that. That's the total all-in cost of what the industry has spent, $6 to $8 billion dollars. So that's we have to take a pause as we start thinking about all of the things that Igor, you mentioned, that it's not just CFTC rewrite, MA refit, then MiFID, whatever the version of MiFID it is, 2, 3, 4, and all of the other reporting rules. And I have been part of like the architecture of reporting solutions within my firm. And at the onset, the belief was that once we build, the cost is going to go down, the complexity is going to go down, all the industry has come together. But if you look at the state of play today, the way things are within a firm typically is that we have our in-house reporting solutions. And on top of it, because of the interpretive risk you spoke about, Tara, some of the firms also have a vendor solution, which is almost like an insurance policy that, okay, we have this other solution with which we can validate. And then the SDRs have to somehow navigate all of these data sets that are being reported. So if we look forward and say that we are going to spend another 10 years on reg reporting, hopefully not for this panel. So it doesn't have to be all this gloom and doom. There are lots of issues, but there is probably a sensible way we can solve for this. And the critical element there is, again, how do we take this collective wisdom? Like all of the panelists are experts, probably not me, but how do we capture all of this into a representation? And for the first time, we do have an opportunity to doing that, both in terms of like the data mappings. Again, all of Kate and Oda, you've mentioned all the samples of like, how do we navigate through pricing elements, et cetera, valuation elements. And also extend it. We can even extend it beyond the data mappings into the eligibility criteria and codify all of that into the ISDA common domain model. So when we started the ISDA CDM 4 years back, reporting use case was one of the critical use cases we wanted to solve. And in CDM, you have a representation of the trade economics, the processing details, and the legal details, which you can use for defining the data mapping. So very simplistically, and this is happening in real time, what we are working on is to take the whatever interpretation the industry lands at, and codify that into data elements within the CDM so that an industry participant can send a sample trade and CDM will spit out based on the jurisdiction what the SDR report should look like. So if firms can think of it, it doesn't have to be a big bang from day one. And we would use the time. If there is an extension, we would love to have that so that we can finish all the codification and do the testing in CDM. And the way firms can think about it is that CDM in the first phase can be a validation. And then slowly, as we start adding more jurisdictions, we can actually replace the internal solutions with a CDM-based solution.
And then I assume, And then as there's, if there were clarifications from regulators or there's a product evolution, those can be implemented centrally and deployed across everyone who relies on the DRR for their implementation.
Yeah, and the biggest benefit in that is that you get a peer-reviewed implementation as a standard, and it doesn't cost a dime to use that because ISDA CDM is open source.
Open source, which means the regulators can also come and see exactly what it is and provide input, which I think we'd be open to, welcome to.
Yeah,
to see whether what they're looking for is actually what the output is. Yep. Kate, we're talking about good output here that ultimately gets down to the SDR, right? Helps people come up with their message. So, what's the role of an SDR in this process? How do you see DTCC participating, as we continue to work to develop the DRR for CFTC?
I think we have to take a very active role, and that is our intent. We are a member of the ISDA DRR CFTC Accelerator Peer Group. As you can tell, I had to read that. There was no way I was going to remember that title. It is. And I'm not the representative who's on it. So I'm like, I'm never going to remember that. And so we definitely are supportive of all of this work. We, as the operator of an SDR, we will ensure that the message output from the DRR Accelerator Group will be ingestible into the SDR. So we'll be heavily involved, I think, when the testing phase comes along, and making sure that any output is coming into the SDR or is looking the way everyone believes it should look, and then getting into the SDR without having any rejects. That's the last thing we want, to go through all of this and then to have it be spit back out by the SDR. So we will be continuing to be involved in this process.
Thank you. Sunil, let's just circle back a sec. So right now we're focusing on the CFTC rewrites and the DR because it has the first compliance date, right? But all the work that's being done for CFTC isn't just for CFTC, right? It has broader applications.
Yeah, absolutely. And the DRR initiative actually started, as you know, with ML refit. And the interesting thing about the ML refit project, and which is still continuing, is that it started as a crowdsourced project. Essentially, industry participants like us are going through and codifying as a collective group all of the data elements within the ML refit requirements. And thanks to the support, obviously, from ISDA and the sponsorship, more importantly, we were able to take that crowdsourced model and put some project rigor and project construct around it, because the fundamental requirement is that if we don't get the CFTC rewrite into it, it would be very difficult for firms to view this as a holistic solution. The second aspect is that if you put ML, refit, and CFTC side by side, there is about 60% overlap in the common data elements, which is why they are called common data elements. Once you are able to add those 60 data elements, the incremental cost of adding anything more in CDM starts to actually decrease quite rapidly. So, which is why then you can think about like any other jurisdiction, and eventually where we want to be is that all of the legacy data elements are codified in CDM. Again, to your point, that the regulators can also see the complexity that is involved in it. So just to give you like because this is all real, this is happening. We had a call this morning. I didn't attend that call, but a lot of people didn't attend, I believe. But where we are is that we have 30% of the CFTC data elements already mapped. We have 2 sprints planned over November and December, where we should be able to get like most of the data elements where industry has a view what they actually map to. If there are, I think, about 14 firms which are active on the CFTC initiative, more to join, I think, Eleanor. So if we can't figure it out across those firms, then those data elements cannot be mapped, right? Like it's impossible. And once we do that, the idea is that like all of this work is going to feed into the EMIR refit, and we should be able to get that fairly quickly onboarded as well. But I would like to actually add on to what we have as the final target state is that FMIs, SDRs, whoever it is, can take all of this and actually build a utility service for the industry so that firms would just send a trade and reporting would be sorted out through this library, is the CDM, and the SDR or whatever this utility is actually produces that report and submits it. That should be the target state we should be aspiring to. It is difficult to get there. Rome is not built in a day, but we have 10 more years to solve that. So let's try to let's try to work towards it.
Speaking of things taking a long time, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we are almost on the precipice of the SEC going live with its trade reporting requirements. These have been a long time coming. Come November 8th, right? We get there, right? That's the initial compliance date for newly traded security-based swaps. Oda, the industry's been preparing for this. Can you talk about those preparations and the availability of some relief that may or may not be helpful?
Yeah, we have been preparing for this for a long time. So as you probably know, the SEC rule and the CFTC rule are vastly different, right? And we received this relief that basically, I think they wanted to say report under the CFTC rules, but they didn't say it. They said they cited certain provisions from the rule. They picked and chose and said, those you can do like the CFTC and the rest, we're not saying anything. So we went at lengths to go through all these provisions to make sure, okay, here we can comply with the CFTC rules and there we cannot. So we have this mix of like CFTC and SEC rules. It's very complicated for the reporting party logic. And we felt like we got it, right? We're in good shape to go live November 8th. Last Friday, I sit with a glass of wine at my desk and see Eleanor sending an email and say, what is this? Question and answers from the SEC on trade reporting. We didn't ask for this. Well, what is going on, right? So all of a sudden we're getting these questions and answers. And some of them, and I said them on an earlier panel, we hadn't asked question number one and we got an answer that was not very helpful because we didn't read their relief like this. And it had to do about timing of regulatory reporting, which you can do under the SEC rules within 24 hours. And under the CFTC rule, you can do it T+1. But they told us now we have to do it as soon as technologically practicable. I'm like, that's in no rule. And it was they cited like the Part 43 rule for regulatory reporting said you have to better do this by November 8th. And as you can imagine, people have billed whatever they felt they had to bill under the SEC and CFTC rules. So we had an emergency call that Friday and saying we have to call this SEC. They cannot just come up with something that we cannot implement within a short time frame. And I think you talked to them and they basically understood the problem and said now verbally, but they don't give it to us in writing that, yeah, maybe we said November 8th, but we really don't mean it. So you have a little bit more time. It's very good when you talk to the compliance department. Eleanor has it under control. Just do what you have to do. But it is a little challenging, I have to say, at the very end now to get everything lined up.
Yeah,
that's just an example.
And just to circle back to what Sunil said about this morning, we had the CFTC DRR meeting. The reason why a lot of people didn't show up, I think, is because this fire drill we have with SBSR, and also it's half term in the UK. So
all piling on top of each other. Yeah. So in the midst of this case, DTCC went into production, right, with your SBSR coverage, right? So how's that going? And then, after this, right, there's a separate compliance date for public dissemination and then separate one for historical reporting.
Correct. Yes, we are live now as of this past Sunday for SEC reporting. The SEC regulator doesn't actually get access to the data until compliance date itself, which is November 8th. So people who wanted to start reporting have started reporting prior to compliance date. We're seeing really good acceptance rates. That's always a positive sign in the beginning. But again, like Oda was saying, there was so much about the relief that, especially for kind of getting the data into the SDR, the data elements themselves that were very similar to CFTC reporting. So none of that was too foreign for everyone. So I think that's going well. No public price dissemination, so no ticker until February 14th. The reporting sides are still required to send, or at least we thought, the SDR thought that that's what was expected by the SEC, is that public price dissemination, or the CFTC Part 43 equivalent of those messages, should be sent in, even though it's not going to the public. And then on February 14th, we open the ticker to the public, starting with the February 14th data. And then the next date is the April 14th date, which by which reporting sides should send all of their historical data to the SBSDR. So again, that isn't so much an issue either for us. It's really, you have the same mechanics that are being used for all of that reporting. It's just different dates for triggers for us. But so far, so good. Like I said, knock on wood, everything is looking good. We'll see.
Okay.
Also, just for the record, I mean, some of the things in the FAQ are good. So we're also grateful for some
Noted,
answers
Oda.
that really helped. I don't want just not, if the SEC listens in.
Yes, some things are very helpful.
good.
Yes,
There's
okay.
2 or 3 where we're very concerned.
Well, we are just at the end of our time. And I really want to thank this great panel. There was a lot of good information. There's clearly a lot in the works. So come tune back in to find out where we land. And please come help us with the DRR. We'd be happy to have your participation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.